What is up, guys? I am here with the marvelous Janny Wurts, one of my favorite voices in fantasy, full stop. How are you doing, Janny?
I'm doing great. It's lovely to be here.
It is a pleasure to be speaking to you today. Thank you so much for your time and for all the work you've done. I guess first up, we've had conversations about this before offline, but just to get the ball rolling, and for anyone who's not familiar with your work, your magnum opus, Wars of Light and Shadow, I kind of just wanted to get into the inspiration, when that idea first originated, and then your journey to get that story on the page and to readers.
I will try to go through this in a way that you get something new that
Mhm.
hasn't been on other streams. But basically, I wanted to turn some fantasy ideas upside down.
Mhm.
The first one being that the hero is always the blonde, tall, handsome guy. And I wanted to take very familiar hero tropes and turn them inside out. So I first set out to tear down the concept of history as written by the victor. This progressed into tearing down the concept of war being the solution to any conflict. And that happened because of the research that I did to make this world's evolution fit into things that were researchable. So where I used something that was a real life technology from our history, I was mixing and matching periods because things didn't develop in the same fashion on
Mhm.
Athera. So I did massive amounts of research into warfare up until gunpowder,
Right.
and then stumbled across a docudrama of Culloden Field, the Battle of Culloden Field, shown in graphic black and white exactly what actually happened historically.
Mhm.
And it blew every concept out the window because I realized at that moment all of the little lovely ballads about Bonnie Prince Charlie, all of the poetry, all of the history, all of the news, all of the depiction of warfare that were given in literature, history, news, totally glorifies.
Mhm.
Might does not make right. And when I saw that documentary with the film ripped off, up against all of the research that I did, it showed me that the victor was not necessarily the right guy.
Mhm.
He was the guy who happened to have the luck or happened to have the superior number or happened to come out on top of the slaughter or nothing went wrong. And so I said, fantasy is one of the chief perpetrators of this myth. And even Tolkien, who saw the horrors of war, gave you the glorious battle that put things right. And
Right.
sometimes the battle is what it takes to put things right. When things slide too far one way, there is no other way out that we have come up with yet.
Mhm.
But I did not want to glorify that. And so I set out to write a fantasy that deconstructed war and deconstructed two sides of a conflict. And it's not going to claim one side is right or wrong. There are moments when each side is right or each side is wrong. One side maybe has the moral ground you agree with. So I'm not going to say, oh, I'm going to write a perfectly balanced. There is no perfectly balanced conflict in anything. It's
Mhm.
all to do with perspective. So this book set out to deconstruct warfare as a solution to anything. And it went from the get go a step further than that. I
Mhm.
wanted to evolve past that to something else. And in this case, I set out to do things that I did not have the knowledge to do. And a lot of the emergent themes that are going to come into the fore in the second half of this series, I was building towards that in the first half. So the familiar ground that you tread to get to a certain tipping point will be very familiar to our experience in our world, depending on how you view the news, which has multifaceted viewpoints. After that point, it steps off into another realm altogether. So I
Okay.
set out to build towards something and I used familiar tropes, familiar ground, and then deconstructed in
Mhm.
order to construct something else, an alternate path of evolution. So the
Something
second
that
half of this series, that's why people hit the second half and they blow up because this is not what they're expecting epic fantasy to take them. It's not going to tread the familiar ground.
I'm keeping that in mind going into Arc 3 to expect maybe what I'm not expecting.
Could
And
be.
I definitely agree, having just finished Warhost, not to get into spoilers, but even most authors that try to deconstruct war still maybe inadvertently romanticize battles a little bit, even when they're trying to tell these themes of like war is not good, but they still kind of romanticize it a little bit. I know Tolkien did at the end of Return of the King, but I definitely got the sense that that was not the mindset in Wars of Light and Shadow, especially there in Warhost. You felt the brutality of it, and I thought that Warhost. I mean, people talk about it all the time how powerful that ending was, and I think it did that absolutely perfectly. And I am super excited for what else you have in store for
Well,
us.
and you'll step into Arc 3 from there. What has this event done to the people?
Mhm.
How do they respond to it?
Right. And
And I
now I'm
won't
thinking
go,
about even
yeah,
before
it's,
Warhost, at the end
mhm.
of Curse. Yeah, no, that's been there since the beginning.
So yeah, if you're going up to Warhost, you look at how did the two characters handle
Mhm.
the problem set in front of them in Curse of the Mistwraith? How did they evolve that problem?
Right.
And
So,
then where do they go from there? What
mhm,
impact is it going to have? And when you glorify the war or you glorify the fantasy ending, oh, the big battle fixes it and all the heroes go home and they're happy. We've seen the PTSD that happens to our
mhm,
own vets. The
right.
reality of the aftermath can be quite different.
Mhm,
And so where this series often trips people is they expect it to get darker, and
right.
up to a certain point, maybe it won't.
Mhm,
Maybe it will do something else. So I'm continuously ripping up expectations, but not in a way that's frivolous or not in a way that's just, oh, let's have a red wedding and destroy all your, not like that.
right, right.
It's different. It's not going to endorse nihilism.
Before you put Curse of the Mistwraith out, did you know where this ending would be in Song of the Mysteries before you finished book one? Did you know, like, did you plot out the ending of Wars of Light and Shadow?
Yep.
So you've
Not
known where this
not
is heading.
necessarily in exact precise detail as to how everything would unfold or
Mhm.
some of the little tweaks, but did I know how it was going to end? Yes. In 1972, when I had the idea, which was 50 years of having the idea to the finished book.
Oh, dang.
Yeah, 50 years. 50 years. I had a tightly spaced one-page outline
Mhm.
and most of the highlights that the series underwent are in that outline.
So you said a big part of the series originated from the idea of examining war and the brutality of it. I'd be interested in knowing what if you can recall what first originated in your mind, the dynamic between the characters of Erathon and Lysair, or the world of Athera. Um,
The spark of the light in the dark and
mhm,
flipping that upside down. Then I built the world around it,
mhm,
and some of the bigger things stepped in, and some of the things that I was experiencing and aiming to do in my life, preparing to do in my life, were projected from the very ground floor.
mhm,
From the very ground floor. So I knew that I was going to end up in a very different realm of thought than I
right.
was even equipped to tackle at that time, because I said the experience to back where I want to take this is not here yet. So I'm not going to get into deeply to that section, but there's a reason why Chibi Poe or Alan calls this transcendent fantasy, because
Mhm,
that plan was always in the works, but I did not have the experience, the knowledge, the background to write that, but I knew that that's where I was taking it. So I
mhm,
said, not only am I embarking on this, not only the physical research, but research that goes off the edge of what
okay.
we know wasn't there yet. So I said, I'm going to have it when I get there.
And in the meantime, I mean, you've written more than just Wars of Light and Shadow. There's Master of Whitestorm, Sorcerer's Legacy, the Empire trilogy with Raymond E. Feist, To Ride Hell's Chasm. Did a lot of these books, like Sorcerer's Legacy and Master of Whitestorm, did you write them after you originally had the idea for Wars of Light and Shadow, in that time between you getting the life experience, or did those ideas come earlier?
The spark for Light and Shadow was 1972, and the first thing I did was cash in some money, sell my horse that I was training, and send myself to Europe. Because I did not have the life experience. I had not been out of the country enough. Then I went to Africa, then I went to Russia, then I went to Korea. So I built up some travel.
Right.
Because I realized the story was way too big for my life experience. So I set out to write smaller things in the meantime. So I actually wrote Master of Whitestorm as a series of short stories that I tried to sell to magazines, and they didn't fly. Until an editor decided, I want an epic fantasy from you. This was after Sorcerer's Legacy. So I turned those short stories into the novelization, though the short stories, if I had done them in sequence, would have done the same thing.
Right.
So that episodic nature is still a bit built into the start of it. Sorcerer's Legacy was a wild hare. It started with an image, a painting that my then agent wanted to run to Britain with to a WarCon and sell, and I did not want to sell the painting because it wasn't finished.
Right.
And I needed to exhibit as an artist that wanted to crack into illustration. The painting needed to be shown at that WarCon that I couldn't afford to go to. The agent was going to take the painting and hang it. So she wanted to sell it, and I said, can't sell it. There's a story attached. So I wrote 18 pages of melodramatic drivel, which I didn't have a clue how to end. And threw it in the file box and said, unfinished story, can't sell the painting. That was the only way to put the brakes on her.
Oh, that's fascinating. I think now that you mentioned it, I think I've heard this story. Oh, go on, but I'm remembering.
A writer's workshop taking place in my apartment in very, very hot weather, and nobody bothered to writing because back then there was no air conditioning. People didn't air condition their houses. So the writers all said, we don't have anything to eat. We bought all these Coke and all this M&Ms and all these chips. What are we going to do all day? And I said, well, here, read this, workshop this. And they loved it. And I'm going, what?
Yeah.
They loved it. And they said, well, how does it end? And I thought I'd written a story with an impossible problem, but I had the impossible ending. I said, oh, I can write the ending to this. So I did. Was
the cover the original painting?
No, the original painting is behind me. Actually, it's not. I sold it. It's gone.
Oh.
It was an airbrush. It had it was put on the audiobook. You can see a piece of the original cover on the audiobook.
Okay.
This cover came way later. They wanted a more graphic look.
Right.
So anyway, the cover that came out on the Bantam edition, I hated in the United States. It's just god awful. It shows this shrinking violet heroine that she's not a shrinking violet. Okay. So anyway, the book sold. So it's a love story, and it's a love story, political intrigue. It's not my thing for usual at all. The editor loved it because it had a female lead back in a time when there weren't very many of those. And she's not a sword slinging barbarian. So it was a little bit different for its time period. And that is the book that caused Ray to look to me to ask me to collaborate for the Empire series.
I want to touch up on, you said that love story is not your usual thing. I would just like to say that I think you probably write love stories better than 95% of all epic fantasy authors. Even if that may not be the goal, I think a lot of the love stories and the romances from Wars of Light and Shadow, from the Gallant. I haven't read Sorcerer's Legacy yet, but usually when I tell people about the Gallant, I'm like, well, it's a love story. And people go, oh, well, I'm not. And I'm like,
the reason why it works is because it's not the love story trope. The love story is part of the bigger fabric of the two characters' lives, and I don't use the usual trope. And when you get to Sorcerer's Legacy, you will see that.
Right.
It's not the usual love story trope. It opens up with a widow, first of all, whose husband's just been slaughtered by a war. She's a war prize. It opens as she's a war prize.
Right.
And she is not in a good position. And she is 3 days pregnant by her dead husband. So that right off the bat is not the usual.
I am captivated.
Trope, is it?
You're ruining my
no, this is all
TBR.
Comes up in practically the first 6 pages of the book. I'm not spoiling anything.
No, I'm just saying you're ruining my TBR because I think I'm going to have to add Sorcerer's Legacy to June.
So yeah, it becomes a very, very desperately real political
Mhm.
intrigue where a lot of lives are on the line. And I'm not going to, you'll get into it and you'll find out. It's very beautifully narrated if you like audiobook by Emily Gray.
Okay. Speaking of great audiobooks, and we mentioned this book earlier, you had Simon Preble narrate Master of Whitestorm. I've got the original cover painted by Janny herself of Corandir here. And I just wanted to ask, when you set out to write Master of Whitestorm, were you looking to deconstruct a lot of the sword and sorcery norms in that novel, or I guess collection of serials that became a novel?
I didn't want to write the usual sword and sorcery where the heroes are untouched by what happens to them.
Mm-hmm.
So Master of Whitestorm is deconstructing the psychology of a legendary hero. What is going on under the hood here? And when you dig into his character, he is not entirely sane.
Mm-hmm.
He is not entirely balanced.
Mm-hmm.
I won't give away the keys to his character, but the people who hire him because he can accomplish impossible things. But what's going on underneath that is those impossible things are damaging him, a damaged person, even more. And what comes out of that? And it's about facing your worst fears. It's about handling trauma. And it deconstructs what lies behind the legendary hero. So yeah, it's not the Conan that just goes swinging through and says, love, kill,
Right.
that's it.
Right.
That's all there is.
Mm-hmm.
This is not going to treat that stuff as a lightweight. So the brutality will be there, the violence, but there's stuff going on behind that. And he's a very different hero than the one that emerges into Ride Hell's Chasm. Two very different heroes.
Oh, I think I have.
They're not the same. They are not the same. This one is dead sane. Very different way they've handled. Very different way they handle the traumas in their lives.
I really enjoyed Master of Whitestorm, and I thought while subverting all of the sword and sorcery tropes, it didn't feel like it was just trying to subvert them for the sake of subverting them. It felt
it wasn't.
very
It's all
human.
about the character.
Right,
it's all
right.
about the character.
Corandir is so. I'm not going to spoil it, but that journey is immaculate.
You'll love Mikhail too. For
Mikhail
reasons.
Is to Ride Hell's Chasm.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And Taskin as well. There's a dynamic between those two characters that plays through.
And since we've discussed Sorcerer's Legacy, can you kind of sell me on To Ride Hell's Chasm? What that one's about? What Michael and Tassin, you said his name was?
Taskin. It starts as a fish out of water.
Mm-hmm.
This is a mercenary who's been injured. He can no longer do the job he used to do. And he's in a kind of a backwater court, pretty much handling the day-to-day policing of the streets in the lower part of town until something big hits the kingdom. And he comes under the command, he is under the command of the aristocratic right hand of the king, captain of the royal guard. And he's an outsider. He's totally different background than this guy. And both of them are ethical. One is the letter of the law. He's the king's right-hand man. He's very, very fair, but he's absolutely wedded to being that upright letter of the law kind of guy.
Right.
And what happens when something hits a kingdom the size of Switzerland that's very insular, very homogeneous, that's way bigger than their experience can handle?
Right.
And you have all the political players throwing static into the situation. And here you have this outsider who was born with the wrong skin color from the wrong kind of culture. They just don't get where he's coming from. And what happens in the dynamic of this huge threat that gradually gets peeled. The princess has vanished and they don't know why.
Okay.
So it's a lot of push-pull politically. It's a lot of push-pull court intrigue-wise. Everybody thinks they have the answer. They're all pounding their stump. And then the people believe one thing, and what's actually going on is so far outside of their bailiwick, they're in deep trouble. And so you have this one character trying to be the marble that threads through the chute to explain, you guys are in deep trouble.
Right. I've heard from some people that the narrative in this one is an incredibly short amount of time, like 4 to 5 days.
5.5 days. So
Five and a half days.
think of the show 24.
Hmm.
You know, the old Jack Bauer, only this is 5.5 days, and it's not Jack Bauer.
Right, right.
This guy is dealing with prejudice. He's dealing with all kinds of things where there are a lot of strikes against him because of the narrow viewpoint in the setting that he has to work with. So it's a lot of fun because no problem can be solved by one person alone. Every person in this kingdom has their part to play. And some come through and some tear down. But it's never one person in a
Right.
situation like that that's going to carry the ball the entire way. So there's a mosaic of characters that come forward. Even the ones that you think are foolish, they might be pivotal at one point in the story.
Right. Okay. Just from that description, I feel like a through line I've seen with a lot of your work. One theme I see a ton of is the juxtaposition, the contradiction of how some characters are perceived and then what's going on inside. I've seen it with Corandir, with Arathon, and sometimes it's characters on the page and sometimes it's the way that they're presented to the reader. But I think that's one thing thematically that you do in your works that I think is just brilliant. And I was wondering, when did you know that was a choice going into these stories, that you were going to play with the characters' perspectives and how you were going to shift that?
Mikhail is a little bit less hidden.
Okay.
In Hell's Chasm, the problem he's facing is the societal barriers.
Oh, okay.
So they don't see him. He sees himself, and he's more direct that way. But I guess as a woman who's done things where I was the only woman on the board, back years ago, women didn't play in pipe bands. I was the first woman to play in 3 of them. So I had to break that barrier 3 times, and the first time was really rough. Nobody wanted a woman in that band. And so it was so-and-so, and the girl, even though I was an adult, okay? I was grown up. I was in college. And the girl, okay? So the only way to hold my own was to outplay and outperform and make myself indispensable by competence until they couldn't. You know, when you take the head of the pipe bands and you beat their grandkid who's been brought up on it from the cradle in a competition, they can no longer say you can't play well enough to be on the street with us. So 3 times I went through this, and by the time I came to Florida, it was like up north, that was normal. Women played in pipe bands all the time. This barrier had been broken again and again and again, but not in Florida. Okay?
Right.
So I crewed on sailboats where I was the only woman. I did co-ed Outward Bound at 17. And that was co-ed. We had women and we had men. But, so the number of times that in a situation where performance was critical on a sailboat in the middle of the Atlantic, you're not fooling around.
Right.
Where you were underestimated, not listened to, or downplayed. And you had to survive that. So I guess I have I relate to characters who aren't heard or aren't seen or are marginalized in a critical situation where you cannot afford to marginalize somebody.
Right.
So, it just, the dynamic of it can really sometimes hit hard. I'll give you an example. I was crewing on a sailboat where I flew down to the Caribbean to bring a sailboat back. And the owner of the boat knew me well. I had crewed before under that captain. He had to have 3 people on that boat to validate his insurance, or the insurance offshore would not cover his boat. He knew, send Wurts an airplane ticket, she'll drop everything and she'll come. It's like, oh, good, another offshore trip. Bam, I'm here for it. The 3rd person on that crew was a bar bunny, because at the time he sailed, it was June, it was hot, it was nearing storm season. Nobody, all the available crew who knew what they were doing had left the Caribbean, and he wanted to get his boat up to Newport. So he walked into the bar and he got this girl drunk, and She agreed to go because he said, well, this other girl, she's going to fly down on an
Mhm.
airplane. Well, this bar bunny figures, well, if this person will come down, if Janny will come down for a vacation, it won't be that bad.
Right.
So she's on the boat. She knows nothing. All she's got is a bunch of bathing suits and some t-shirts. And
Oh.
we sail on a beautiful 20-knot wind, clear Caribbean day. We get outside of Charlotte Amalie Harbor off St. Thomas, and suddenly we hit a 3 foot chop, okay?
Mhm.
3 foot. And she's like freaking out. She's
Right.
like losing it.
Mhm.
There's, and it's not a terribly big boat. It's like, what was that, a 37 footer? Yeah, I think it was a 37-foot boat. It was one very big. She's
Right.
freaking out. And I had to grab her by the collar and say, look, do you see me panicking? No. Do you see John panicking, who's the captain? No. Fine. You are not allowed to panic until you see both of us lose it. Then you can have hysterics.
Right.
So, 14-day trip, 1,400 miles from there to Newport,
Mhm.
in mostly calm because we were in the doldrums of summer. We're sailing right across the doldrums. We had to have a spinnaker up. She couldn't read the compass. She'd drift off course with the spinnaker up. The spinnaker would wrap around the headstay. Thousands of dollars worth of sail wrapped. The captain is losing it. And, number 3 time at night, untangling the spinnaker from being wrapped around the forestay because she couldn't ride the compass. And I'm like, John, don't get pissed at me. She's the one on the helm. I'm
Yeah.
not going to lose it. I'm not going to get upset. I'm going to be patient here, and we're going to untangle this without losing your sail and seeing it shred. But don't you lose your temper at me. Because if you do, we'll whack you
Yeah.
across the face.
Right.
So, watching him having to baby her all the way to Newport, where I'm the mainstay. It was him and me on and off watch, holding that boat together to get it there. And we
Mhm.
didn't hit anything worse than a few thunder squalls. We didn't get
Yeah.
anything terrible. Nothing bad happened. But if anything bad happened, she would have been useless.
Did you know that before she started panicking? Like when you saw her get on the boat, where you
I
just
didn't know he had a bar bunny. He didn't tell me that.
oh.
She was a cute little blonde. So, having to balance that, him losing his temper, her completely having hysterics, and him having to stay up at night to calm her down or talk to her to keep her awake. I didn't get that kind of treatment.
Right.
He went down and crashed because he had to baby her through her watches. So a 3-man watch, 24 hours, where it should have been
Mhm.
6, 6, and 6, suddenly
Right.
became 12 and 12.
Mhm.
So maybe I have a little bit of understanding about what it's like to be the minority in the room.
Right.
Not to the degree of Mikhail fighting
Mhm.
a racial situation, not to the degree of somebody who's got other things that are different than everyone else thinks is, quote, normal. Normal
Mhm.
doesn't exist.
Right.
So I guess that kind of a character, I can write that kind of character because I've been there.
Mhm.
I had 2 older brothers, So the 2 older brothers, the 2 younger sisters who tattle on you all the time, the 1 older brother who beats you up all the time. I mean, you get used to being in the middle of push and pull politics or push and pull dynamics, people dynamics.
Mhm.
And I can hate it, but I can understand how that works. So maybe that's, I've never talked about this, but yeah, you asked how did I come up with these characters and the insight into them.
Yeah.
That's probably a lot of what went on is I spent a lot of time not only just observing it, but
But
dealing
living
with
it.
it.
Right.
And not just in those situations, also in other situations.
I guess I don't really have a caveat into my next question, but thank you for that story, by the way. I guess one of the things I wanted to ask you about is I heard you talking on, well, I heard it in a discussion about the novella, and I also heard you talking to Tori about how the Gallant, let me see here. Yeah, the Gallant, the novella preceding the Wars of Light and Shadow. So you had the conception of what you started writing Varaine's story, if I have this correct, 10 years prior to you actually finishing it. You shelved it, and then 10 years later you figured out what you wanted to do with that story. Is that true?
Yes.
Okay.
The Gallant started because there's one line in the early part, possibly Ships of Mariar, maybe Curse of the Mistwraith, where it's mentioned that Varian is wearing a fashion that's centuries out of date.
Mm-hmm.
And that it's mentioned that certain women 5 centuries ago regarded him very highly. He was a race.
It's ships. It's ships.
Yeah, it's
the beginning of ships.
And it may even be hinted at in Curse of the Mistwraith.
Right.
And one of my readers said, I want to know this character's backstory.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd always had a grasp of who Varian was and why he was so good with women.
Right.
He had a knack for women, not because he seduced them, not because he was this hot masculine figure. He was good with women because he understood them and he respected them and he listened to them and interacted with them as an equal.
Mm-hmm.
So he's not he was a rake. He played around.
Right.
Definitely. He loved his time with women. He enjoyed them to the max, but he didn't do it by disrespecting them.
Right.
He did not do it by being patronizing. He did not do it by considering himself to be better than, or, they were his rightful property, none of that stuff. So I started writing the story, and the beginning of it wrote very quickly because the timing of when he would have been a young man was a very politically hot potato moment in history. And I knew that he had pretty common origins. He was just an everyday guy. He was the son of a merchant factor.
Mm-hmm.
So the hurdle became, how did he become this really powerful apprentice spellbinder? And how did he become guardian of Myrtlevane Mire, Myrtlevane Swamp? Because that's one of the most dangerous places to be in all of the planet.
Right.
So how did he end up there?
Mm-hmm.
So the story wrote, and then it wrote up to the point in the middle where I don't want to have a spoiler.
Right.
It was not even about a third of the way there. And then I paused because I said, I need to be able to encapsulate this immense change in this character. And I know what happened to him in the beginning, the opening scene, what happens to him, where that leads. And then I paused because what transcended that moment? What lifted him over that hurdle? What built the person that he had to become? And I waited until I had the exact combination of what historically would have happened to make that immense leap from who he had been to the awareness he had to carry to become what he did become.
Right.
And little pieces from the main series just fell into place.
Mm-hmm.
There's a setting in Ships of Mariar, which you see 600 years later, and that played in, and this played in, and that played in, and that played in. And I knew when I wrote The Gallant what role Varian was going to play all the way through the main series as well. So it all had to dovetail. And it wasn't a case, I just didn't have the ideas in order, and I didn't have time to apply the thinking to it in a concentrated manner because I had to finish the series.
Mm-hmm.
So I sort of had this fragment of a story, and I said, I don't know where it's going to lead me, but I don't have time to focus on it right now. And then it just popped into shape.
Okay.
And once I had those final pieces, how those pieces were going to fit, it wrote fairly quickly, and I finished it off because I did it as a publicity piece for a Secrets and Spells anthology, which was women authors, to help publicize the big series because I wasn't getting a lot of publicity at the time. And so I hope to bring in new readers. And this was a story I thought would be conducive for women, but the men seem to like it too.
It's been my selling book. I got my sister on the Gallant, and then now I see her taking Curse of the Mistwraith with her everywhere. So it was able to grab her. Some people I feel like have trepidation about, that's a lot of trust with the bigger books, and they don't know how excellent the writing is, how powerful the story is. So a lot of times I like to sell people on the Gallant, and then it hooks them into the main series.
But if they don't like a love story, we'll give them something else.
Right, right, right. But I
And
think even people who aren't prone to liking love stories, there's just something in the Gallant that sets it apart. It doesn't feel romantasy in the slightest.
it's
It
not
feels
romantasy. One,
right.
romantasy requires
Hmm.
certain things that the Gallant will not deliver. The requirements for a romance novel are not in the Gallant.
Right.
Real bad things can't happen. I'm not writing a romance. That's why I always call it a love story. And the second thing is the foundational driver of Varian's character.
Hmm.
That moment, that love story was integral to what he became. And I always knew that.
Hmm.
I always knew that, but it isn't the standard trope. They
Right.
are not the usual couple.
Yeah.
And so once again, my starting point is not the usual place for where the romance or the love story usually begins.
Hmm.
It's different. It's taking a different tack.
Yeah, agreed 100%. If you want to touch up on this, if not, I can edit this out later. But we've talked a little bit about your writing on the Guardian, and if you wanted to, do you want to go in a little detail on how that one's writing, maybe how the journey to write it is a little bit different than the Gallant, and how that's been coming along?
The Guardian is Varian's story resumed 100 years later.
Hmm.
So the ground underneath of that story, the backdrop, the historical moment has shifted huge. That time period, the Mist Wraith is just about to conquer the whole place.
Mm.
So where Varian's story begins in the Gallant, the Mist Wraith is just invaded.
Hmm.
And people assume, oh, this all happened overnight. No, it didn't. It took 100 years. There was a 100-year battle to stave off that conquest. So the Guardian takes place close to the end of that. And it took a lot to put it together because I had to research all of what every faction was doing at that moment before that final conquest happens and what tips it over the brink. There are a number of events that tip that final moment over the brink. And they aren't just humankind. We still got Paravians on the world. We still got all kinds of things going on. And so I had to go, which of these historic events are going to play into this exacting story of where Varian's thread runs through this? And I wasn't sure how many of those events directly impacted it.
Right.
So I sort of wrote all of them in there, and now I'm pulling out what doesn't apply.
Hmm.
And as the story progressed, some of those events ran through the story, actually involved the story. His fate ran through some of these events. So I had to figure out in depth exactly how that would have played. And then I thought, what goes even further beyond that? Where do I finish this story? And that led me on a whole other rabbit hole. Huge, because
Okay.
suddenly we're crossing terrain that's actively got remnants of the first and second ages. We're crossing extremely volatile historical ground. We're crossing places where the series does not go, where thousands of years of history run through where these characters are. And how much of that is backdrop, how much of that is actively in the story, how much of that affects what happens to these characters.
Right.
I had to know all that. And then I had to figure out the ending. How do I finish this off? What triggering event finishes this story? What ends the character arc from the beginning to the end? So it ended up covering a whole lot of ground I didn't expect. And I ended up with a 240-page messy draft. Really messy draft. So now I'm editing it. I got about 27 pages edited. I'm going back to the beginning of it, pulling out what doesn't apply, ramping up the things that need to be there, refining the character who plays against Varians. And then in the latter half, how much of that historical stuff that they encounter, how do I describe that? Is it just a name and a mention and they pass through something where something happened? Or is it interactive, which some of it is? And so I've got to push all that together until it's cohesive, and then I'll be ready to have it test read. and then I'll do a final polish, and then I will get it edited, and then we'll see what we do with it.
Sweet. That is extremely exciting.
So I don't want to say where it's going, and there's one line mentions several in the main series, and this is going to unfold those events.
Okay. Awesome. That is captivating.
So there's a massive build for things that won't show up in the series until probably Trader's Knot. They'll be there. There'll be mentions, but they won't unfold for you in the main series till Trader's Knot. But it won't matter. It's like the Gallant. You can read this ahead of those.
Okay, so you can read The Guardian prior to Trader's Knot if you want to. Yep. You'll just have a different context.
Yep.
Okay.
And you could possibly even read it without the Gallant.
Oh.
We'll see. Let me get it done, and then I'll throw it to somebody who's never read the Gallant and say, how does this play? But yeah, it's a pretty massive thing. And between the two of them, if I melt them together, they're almost a novel.
Oh, yeah.
If I do an omnibus with the two of them.
Oh, that would be awesome.
That was the plan from the start, was to create something that could be omnibused and done as a book at some point.
Right, to have Varane's whole story in one little compendium omnibus.
Or at least his prequel story, yeah.
Right.
Because the series picks up and shows some of what happens.
Yeah, I think where I'm at, Varane hasn't he's had a few scenes, and he was a very important character in those scenes, but he hasn't, done a ton yet so far in the series. So
he will appear, and he will play a role off and on through the whole, and he will appear in the final volume as well. Not such a small moment. So he appears at moments.
Amazing. So another thing I wanted to touch up on is you recently finished, where is it? Song of the Mysteries, the final book in the Wars of Light and Shadow. And I wanted to talk about, because this, I hope it's not presumptuous for me to make this statement, but I feel like Wars of Light and Shadow is your magnum opus series, your biggest, longest epic. And I wanted to ask you how the way you go about writing and what you're drawn to, how that has shifted since finishing this 11-book series. Because, I mean, like you said, it took 50 years from conception to finishing Song of the Mysteries. So I wanted to kind of gauge your thoughts on what it was like putting that book out and then going on to write other things after finishing, your 11th or 10th, I guess, depending on how you look at it, volume in the series.
The moment I finished the draft and I pegged the whole thing and brought it home, I knew I had brought it home. There may be readers who don't like the ending, but they didn't read the book that I wrote.
Right.
They wanted something different. Because there's absolutely no question in my mind that I finished exactly the story I wanted to tell and exactly the way I wanted it to end up. The relief was massive.
Right.
I was so glad when I had the final page of the draft, because publishing has changed out from under me so many times during the conception of this story to its finished. There was always that piece of terror that I wouldn't be able to bring it home.
Right.
Not because I couldn't finish it, but because publishing is accelerating so fast and shifting. And there hasn't been as much support for this. It was all being driven by my initiative. So the relief of getting it done, getting it out there, getting it published, even though nothing may come of it, I finished that goalpost.
Right.
Because I had no concept when I began, first of all, how much it was going to put me through to write it, to stay true to the conceptual ideas that I did not have the knowledge to write when I began, or the experience. You'll see when you get in the second half. It goes into some territory that fantasy usually doesn't cut, or at least not this way.
Right.
To have accomplished that and got it done and got it published was just huge, because I had to sacrifice a lot to get there. Now that it's finished, there's absolutely no question in my mind that, first of all, I don't think I have an idea that's that big to write again. Second of all, publishing won't support that kind of an idea again. My readership isn't big enough to support that idea. Again, I don't have enough years to put into it. 50 full-time years. I did not
Right.
have a second job. I was writing full-time. Now, I was writing
Okay.
other novels at the beginning while I was working on the concepts in the background. Nonetheless, there just isn't enough time or money or whatever support to do this scale of a project again. So right now, I have lots of ideas. There's
Okay.
plenty of things put on hold. There's lots of backstory in Ethera I can write. The story I'm writing now, the next novel, is going to be more of a lighter trip because that's what I want to do right now. I want to be a little bit more free. It won't be tied into this world. It won't be tied
Right.
into any other thing because I just want to be able to just do something and be done and enjoy it. Wake up that just invent it as you go kind of feel. So I have a nautical novel because I have huge nautical experience. It's about a 75-foot schooner with a crew that comes from fairly broken people. They run courier, which means they go out in any kind of weather. It's a dangerous job. And they get in pickles because their crew is not necessarily on the straight and narrow everywhere they go. This guy might be jailbait in one point, and this guy's got a history, and this guy has a bit of a temper, and put him in the wrong situation, he'll blow up. So if you enjoyed Firefly, this might appeal to you. It's a little bit raunchy, it's a little bit disrespectful in some ways. So that's under submission right now. It's 80 pages polished. It's out there. There's a full outline. There's the possibility of 2 other sequels that I could write or not. It could stay a standalone. So that's what I'm playing with. And the characters are lively. They're fun. There's lots of banter. There's lots of repartee. There's lots of, grinding gears and not a lot of plot armor. They're going to get in some pickles. So it's just me blowing off steam after having done this big, huge series.
Yeah, that sounds liberating and like it would be extremely fun to read. So I can't wait.
So it
for
isn't
the
too
day.
terribly politically correct, but on the other hand, it doesn't go into sexual assault. On the other hand,
Right.
people are complaining that, there aren't any books that men would like to read. Men would probably enjoy this. So, it's just fun. It's just fun.
Yeah.
And it's based on my experience sailing as crew on the Wolf, which took broken people and did humanitarian runs and sailed in some pretty crazy situations with crews that were very mixed matched from all kinds of different backgrounds, from all kinds of different orientations.
Right.
And did it successfully. So I'm basing it on that, but that's where the Firefly feel comes from, because that was the kind of crew they would pick up.
Right.
They took on people who were addicted to drugs and helped them straighten out. They gave people who were lost and homeless a place to stay. So it was a real boat and a real crew and a real captain and a real situation. But I'm writing a fantasy. None of the people in this are based on them at all.
Right.
It's more the crew dynamic that I was capturing.
Right. It's not
and the idea
one-to-one.
of a boat that would go out into any situation. There's some times where these kind of ships do not want to leave the harbor. Too dangerous. But if you're running courier, if you've promised to get a message through, you have to.
Right.
So they lose people, or they have lost people, often in the past, because they're going out in conditions where most captains would stay in port. And they run afoul of a very big situation in the course of this book.
Right.
So it's kind of fun.
Awesome. I cannot wait till...
It's a big, huge world. Sorcery is messed with people. It's messed with people genetically. There's all kinds of diversity that's accepted or not accepted. There's all kinds of crazy threads running through this. So it's really a wild scene.
Sweet. Okay, yeah, no, that sounds amazing. I can't wait till we as readers can get a version of that. Hopefully that, can get in our hands soon.
So yeah, I'm also writing a short story prequel to this, which is going into a charity anthology to help someone fund some cancer funds.
Mm.
I won't go into detail. It's got to be finished and accepted, but I've got the draft within 4 pages of being complete right now. The deadline's July.
Mm.
And I just took 2 of the main characters from the book and showed how they met. Took their back history and just peeled a little piece of back history out. And since they're very colorful characters, the back history is extremely colorful.
Okay.
So it's a pastiche piece. It probably would not see print until next year.
Mm-hmm.
But then it comes back to me, and of course I'll produce it as a short after the time period expires.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just a fun piece. So I'm enjoying myself. That's what I'm shooting to do right now, but I've got lots of ideas. There's probably a list of 14 books that I would like to write.
Dang.
But
Okay.
it depends how things pan out. Kobo just decided to allow AI into their mix.
Oh, yeah.
And that's pretty horrifying. And they're claiming to the authors that this is to help us connect you to your readers, to feed the algorithm so that you sell more books. But once you've let AI in there to analyze your prose and your writing, they're not going to stop there. Come on.
Right.
And whose AI is coming in to do this job? They didn't even say.
Right.
So is it another way that AI is worming in there to get a legitimate access? So it's
Right.
like self-publishing could go sour real fast because of all of this.
Mm-hmm.
And that's scary.
Yeah.
So depending, what is my future going to be? I don't know. If I don't get a traditional deal, or I don't get a traditional deal I like, where am I going to go with this? Because if AI is going to play a big fiddle in the middle of my concert,
Right.
I got a pretty stiff ethic about that.
Yeah. I guess that people are selling AI as like the editing tool, but I find it very hard to believe that it won't go from like editing tool to, I mean, you won't have to pay an AI. So I feel
And
like,
why not learn to edit, and why not pay an editor?
right.
Why not learn to edit? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
at this stage, I would love to have an editor who'd get in there and really get in there and edit. But
Mm-hmm.
mostly what they do with me is commas and periods
Right.
and hyphens.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't start that way. I had to learn, each book I did, the editor, what they did taught me something, and I learned how to apply it. But
Mm-hmm.
can AI do this job? No, it doesn't know why it's doing anything. It's not going to understand style. It's not going to understand nuance, and God help them, it may not understand the 16th definition in the Oxford English Dictionary that happens to be a nautical term for which there is no replacement. So I run into that all the time with stupid spell checkers. It's
Right.
like, you don't know your words, idiot.
Yeah.
So stop trying to change, and they've run my books through proofread sometimes, and you often wonder, was it a mechanical process because it changed the meaning of a word it didn't recognize?
Right.
Did a person do that and they were ignorant, or was it a machine did that?
Mm-hmm.
So
I will
it's
just substitute
pretty
something
horrifying.
itself did not understand.
Well, in Song of the Mysteries hardback, if you have it,
Mm-hmm.
there is a sentence where they turned the word rose into risen. And it was rose the flower being referenced, not risen the verb. And when you understand the Black Rose prophecy, it kind of destroyed the meaning of that scene right there. Bam!
Oh no.
Killed it. I'll tell you where it is when you get there. But yeah, that made me angry. And it's like, who was doing this? It was nobody who read the book and understand what they were fixing.
And so that's in the finalized version of the hardcover?
Yeah.
Oh.
I didn't see it. It was the proofer did it. It passed me through page proofs, passed me through copy edit, and it was correct. It was the proofreader who changed it.
Mm.
And this happens to me a lot. The proofreader has changed final text in so many of these books because the proofreader didn't know the word. They changed the word skirled to skirted.
Yeah.
I think that was in Keeper of the Keys. So, get out of here.
Yeah.
You don't know the word skirled, look it up. Don't assume the author got it wrong.
Yeah, there's probably a modicum of ego there to just change it without even notifying you.
For a while there, I told them to run my text, have the proofer query me for every single word they change. And for a
Right.
while they respected that, but then they stopped. In Song of the Mysteries, they changed things. There were 2 or 3 instances where the proofer went through and destroyed something.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a problem. Traditional publishing is not what it was when I started out. Wouldn't have happened like that, because they've cut the personnel. They used to have in-house personnel do a lot of this work.
Mm-hmm.
The editor was in-house, the proofreader was in-house, the copy editor was in-house. These were these people's jobs, and then they started farming it out to independent contractors who could be anybody.
Well, I will say, you spoke earlier about how it might have been difficult. You had to fight to get all the books published, and how you made that come full circle with Song of the Mysteries. You finished it. I just want to say this isn't really a question; it's just a statement. But you have so many authors. I'm not going to name names who their series blow up, and then they kind of lose interest in the story. And I think it's so inspiring that you had to fight tooth and nail to get these books out there, and you maybe weren't being listened to all the way, in terms of what you were aiming to do with the story, and you still worked to get that story out there into readers. And I feel like that level of passion is bound to come through on the page. So I just want to say that I very much admire the tenacity and the drive to get it done.
I had a very clear vision
Mm-hmm.
of what I wanted to do, and that clear vision had snapped into place within probably 3 to 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
3 to 6 months. So from June of 1972, by the time I got around to winter, I knew what I was doing.
Right.
I knew what I was aiming to do. Nowhere did I claim I had all the knowledge and
Mm-hmm.
ability and craft even.
Right.
The worst thing I could have done was publish this book then,
Mm-hmm.
or sell it as my first novel. Totally.
Right.
I knew I wasn't ready. There's no way I had the command of what I had to have on the page to make this thing work. So first, I had a clear vision. Second, when I did have editors who were behind it, they didn't want to know the ending. I would have preferred that they did, so they knew what they were looking at. But they said, nope, we don't want to know. So I said, okay. And that was part of the problem. Publisher never had a clue where this was going.
Right.
And so it became a little bit like this, because varying scenes wanted to be cut out. The first editor wanted to get rid of varying scene in book 1. And I said, you can't do that, because here's where it's going. We need this here, right here on the ground floor. So it was good in that by the time Fugitive Prince came around, and the beginning of that third arc, they'd pretty much stopped paying attention.
Mm-hmm.
So it was all up to me. It was all up to me, and I didn't have a huge fan base screaming and yelling and crying. Why wasn't I doing it this way? I mean, I got the people who bitched in a review or something, but I didn't have this massive fan base saying, how dare I do this or do that, or when was I going to get to that? All they just said was, oh, this that I wanted to happen didn't happen.
Yeah.
So in a way, love it or hate it, the concept was very pure that way I brought it home, because nobody was messing with me. All they cared was, well, we just got to finish this contract.
So there was a freedom that came with that?
Yeah. In many cases, the book was turned in manuscript form, final manuscript, and went straight to copy edit. There was no editor, no read, no nothing. Straight to copy edit, straight from copy edit to production. So they didn't even know, they were marketing it and hadn't read it.
Yeah.
And then I got an editor to read it all the way through, hoping I'd get an edit for the final book. And she left.
Yeah.
She left the company, and Elden Ring came out. It's like nobody was doing anything. They were all playing Elden Ring.
Yeah.
So love it or hate it, it's all on me.
Right.
So there's your difference there. I didn't have the huge driver pushing me, nor would I have budged for that.
Right.
But it wasn't there. I mean, I didn't have all these people. I did have them screaming, how come it's taking you 5 years to write this book? Well, aging parents and downsizing their house and dealing with dad dying and having to deal with mom getting memory problems. And, that was all going on too.
Right.
But the books got done the way the vision began. It finished exactly as it should have. Love it or hate it.
Excellent. Excellent. Recently, I mean, at least within my niche of, the booktube space, long before I ever made a video or anything, just me as a viewer, I started catching on to uh, a lot of hype surrounding Wars of Light and Shadow. I feel
Buzz,
like,
buzz, hype is what the publisher does
right.
to market a book.
Okay.
Buzz is what the readers do
Okay.
out of their own enthusiasm.
Right.
Huge difference.
Okay. So this buzz, right? Um, I've seen a huge. It went from something that was never on my radar. I'd never heard of Wars of Light and Shadow, and I've been an avid fantasy fan since practically since I was 12, and I just hadn't heard of it. And then all of a sudden, through word of mouth, through different booktubers talking about it. John from Talking Story is a big one. Philip Chase, AP Canavan, they got a hold of this book and pretty much across the board of the people that have given this a try, they've really really vibed with it. I mean, John, AP, Philip especially loved it. What has that been like to see the buzz kind of come
Fantastic,
for this series?
because I've had this constant war because the Empire series with Ray Feist went out there and made a pretty good mark.
Mm.
And it's not the same story. Mara's story begins with her at 18 years old, and she is faced with a society that's rigid in tradition, highly patriarchal, and she has to change that society to save her family. Mm-hmm. Not just her family name, that's the beginning. She has to save her living family by the end of it, because it would have destroyed. She had to change the society. But it's a very linear story.
Right.
You learn as she learns, and there's not unanswered questions. This book cannot be read by a 13-year-old or a teenage kid, which Empire can be. Mm-hmm. Feist readers who are teens can read that Empire and be fine.
Right.
Wars of Light and Shadow is not written for that demographic, even though some of the people who have read Empire will read Light and Shadows and love it. Mm-hmm. But the story isn't written linearly.
Right.
It has many, many layers. And while it isn't like Malazan, where it throws you in over your head and you spend all this time puzzle piecing it together, it leaves many pieces of questions unanswered.
Right.
And some questions will be answered in the next sentence or the next paragraph. Some won't be answered until 3 or 4 books down the line, but they will be answered, and they will be answered in a way that the characters will lead you through it. But a reader who can't stand not knowing how everything works, if they can't stand not knowing the answer for a paragraph or a page or a chapter or a book, they're going to get impatient. So there's certain readers who are almost OCD.
Right.
They have to know it as they go. And those are the ones who are going to DNF. And certainly there have been booktubers who have DNF'd it, and that's fine, because if you're that kind of reader, my mother drove me crazy. She tried to read these books, and she was constantly picking up the phone saying, "What did you mean by this?" And I'm like, "Read the next page.
Yeah.
Read the next chapter."
Right.
It'll get there. And you're meant to question what's happening. You're meant to not understand everything. We go through life like that. We have to make decisions based on what we know. And a week later, a month later, a decade later, we learn different. And suddenly that choice isn't the one we would have made, but you have to act where you are. Right. The characters have to act where they are. So all the information is not there. It is for some of the characters, and you don't know where they're coming from till the story unveils it. So when you say to me, well, what is the moral high ground of this? Why I don't understand what this faction is, or I hate this faction, they must be awful bad. You don't know yet.
Right.
So the people who just have to know, they just have to know.
Yeah.
This book won't work. If you have aphantasia and you can't visualize, this book may be difficult, because I'm a highly visual writer and I'm a visual painter, and I'm going to put you in that scene and I'm going to give it to you in full living color. It's going to be an experience, and this can expand your brain. I've had people say, I couldn't visualize before when I started this series, but I could by the end of it. But you're growing those synapses to do it.
Yeah.
And that takes time. I've had people say, now I know how to describe a scene to my blind friend, what a sunset's like. So, but if you cannot visualize and you think all of the descriptions are window dressing and you blip over them because you're just not going to go there, this book may not work for you. So my problem was, in my continuous battle with the publisher, is please stop marketing this book to the Empire readers.
Yeah.
It is not that target audience.
Mm-hmm.
Some of that audience will come through. Some of that audience will mature into this book.
Right.
But this is not your target audience. And if they pick it up, they're going to one-star it. They're going to DNF it. A large proportion of them are not going to understand what they're reading. They're not ready for it. So stop trying to throw a quote on the front of the book that's going to lead that reader in. And it will make the reader who would like the series disparage it and not start it at all, because this is not the fantasy I'm looking for. I lost that battle and lost that battle and lost that battle and lost that battle until finally I finished Song of the Mysteries. Now I had time to start mailing out books, beginning to get the books. So I did the targeting to get the right readers to read that book, and then let them fall in love with it or did not finish it or whatever happened to it from there. I never asked and I never questioned. So that's why suddenly it's blossoming, because the right readers are finally discovering it. If they had from the get-go, I'd be in a whole different place. You need to focus like you would with a Gene Wolfe book. It's a little more engaging character-wise than the Gene Wolfe book. So it's got a bit of this and a bit of that and a bit of that and a bit of that. It's going to throw you in the deep end in many ways like a Malazan would, but it's going to develop differently.
Right.
But so it's finally reaching the readership because the right readers are finding it.
Yep. That's one reason when I tell people about Wars of Light and Shadow, the two series I compare it to, even though it is incredibly different from those two series, is Malazan and Realm of the Elderlings, because I think that there is some Venn diagram overlap in the fan bases there. I'm not going to go to Wheel of Time fans and be like, and you know, I see like Nico's book reviews. He loved Wheel of Time. It was his favorite series. Now this is his favorite series, but I don't just try to sell Wars of Light and Shadow to everyone. You know, like I think it's important that it finds the right audience. And I think you're absolutely right about, like, much like Malazan, you have to be comfortable with not knowing everything outright, and with trusting the author and knowing that she's, you know, that you're going to guide us through to that, you know, where we need to get in the story.
Proof is in the pudding. It has to deliver. Right. Also, everything can go wrong when a reader picks up a book with a wrong expectation. If they pick up this book and they think it's going to be another Empire and it's going to be another Mara and it's going to be another, you know, an Asian type setting, Asian, Native American, we mixed a lot of things up into the Empire pie. They're going to be disappointed because this is not that. When the reader's expectations are tuned correctly, a reader that might not have liked this book may like it very well because they're going into it on the right foot. Right. So even some readers who think they wouldn't like it might well like it if they're prepared for what they're looking at. They'll pick the right time to read it. They won't take it to the beach and try to read it on an airplane. They won't try to skim it because they'll realize there's more going on here. I pick and choose what time I read a book that takes more focus. I like a fluff read any time of the day. Yeah. Sometimes I don't want a fluff read. I'm sick of them. So creating the expectations is more important in many ways than worrying about this book isn't for everybody. Let the reader make the choice. But when you tune the expectations so they step into it understanding what they're going to get. How many people do you know that read Gardens of the Moon and would have flipped off and thrown it away if there wasn't a big fan base saying, wait, you need to look at this, or you need to, this book needs that kind of audience behind it. Right. Then it will do what it's supposed to do. But there's a lot of slim pickings on the ground when it comes to a wide enough readership outside of a certain small circle. I'm hoping that it will grow that. But I still get it when somebody throws it out on a big forum somewhere and says, oh, you have to read this. It's really wonderful. And an unsuspecting reader comes along and picks it up. What's this? They aren't expecting what they're getting because the fan base is not wide enough to keep them going or to give them the footing they need to understand this is the state of mind you need to step off on this journey. Right.
Not even just with Wars of Light and Shadow, but with a lot of my favorite books. One of my biggest pet peeves for reviewers, just a little side tangent here. I absolutely hate when you see a Goodreads review that says this book was not for me, 3 stars, 2 stars, 1 star. It's like if it wasn't for you, I don't think you should be leaving those star ratings. If it is not an objective fault of the author, if it's not an intentional, like if the author intended for something and maybe the story fell flat, that's a reason to leave. But if it just wasn't your type of book, I really hate that when people go in with the expectations, don't pay attention to the intentions of the, because there are times where I go in with the wrong expectations. I have to set the book down and come back with my expectations,
Or it just
adjusted.
it just isn't your thing.
Right.
Sometimes their books are just aren't your thing. But it's like I don't mind the ones so much who say this book wasn't for me and they throw their rating. I don't pay attention to star ratings. That's bullshit.
Right.
The thoughtful review is much better. I don't care how many stars you stuck on when a reviewer that bothers to say what worked for them or what didn't is much
Right.
more valuable than stars. So I don't care about stars. That's why I
Right.
don't put star ratings anymore. I just ditched it. What gets me even more is I am a YA influencer on Book Talk, coming in and flinging this book disappointed me. What are you doing here? This book
Yeah.
certainly wasn't written for a YA audience, even though I have had readers who were younger and who did understand what they were reading. They were
Right.
more mature than most 13-year-olds or what, 12. I think my youngest reader I ever heard of was 12. And she got it. She blew my mind. She
Right.
got it.
Well,
But
she's a
she was
better
not the usual person.
adolescent than I am. I would not have gotten it at 12.
Yep, I got taken to task because somebody said I read Jane Austen at 11 and loved it. And it's like, you're not the average 11-year-old, okay?
Yeah.
So that's okay. There are prodigies and there are teens who may love this, but this is not for the YA TikTok influencer.
Right.
Certainly not written for them. And so,
Absolutely.
okay, I let that fly off the window because I don't care. I mean, it's like, it's no skin off my nose that this person who is reviewing in that venue thinks this about a book that wasn't written for that venue. That's about them, not me. So that's where authors, I think, make a mistake. I don't care what the reviewers say. It means a lot that they took the time and respect to do that they took a piece of their life and put a comment about a book. That means something. But it's about their reaction to the book.
Right.
Them plus whatever they took away from on the page, whether they read carefully or didn't read carefully, that's about them too. It's not about what I put there, it's what they took away. Their attitude, their response, their baggage, their treatment of the words, their focus or lack of it. It's about them. So I don't get bent out of shape about a review because it isn't about me at all. It's everything about them. And reviewers take it very personally when I don't say it's about me. It's not. It's about you and this book. It's no longer me anymore. You brought your own alchemy to what was on that page, and what you take away from it, that is your individual take. And it's none of my business. And the only time I'll take issue is if you make a comment about my personal life, or if you say, I use AI, because I don't. I can prove it. In fact, it wasn't even invented. There was no AI when Song of the Mysteries was turned in and went into production. So sorry, that one's going to fall flat.
One that I take
Not gonna
offense to when it comes to your books, whenever I see it written, is when people say, like, purple or overflowery prose, because to quote AP Canavan, I feel like the writing style in Wars of Light and Shadow is concise. That is the word I would choose. Every single word
That
is perfectly
is
picked for the scene.
true according to you and me, but according to them,
I'm sorry.
not gonna-
There's
I know,
too many
I'm
books
not
out
gonna
there
let
where
it
you can
bother me
see the
because-
flowery word drivel.
Oh,
In
haven't
Wars
you
of Light
seen-
and Shadow, if a word's there, it's there for a
it's
reason.
there for a purpose. And the other thing is, when they go, oh yeah, Wurts lives using her reference book and thesaurus, it's like thesaurus, whatever. I can't even pronounce it. Shows how
Yeah.
little I care. No, I got my vocabulary from reading, people.
Right.
Reading books. I can show you notes from my copy editor who is 50 years in the business.
Mhm.
50 years in the business saying, Wurts has corrected me a couple of times.
Yeah.
In other words, looked up the word and went, damn.
Yeah.
So, once in a while I'll fry people's brains a little. There's the nitpickers who go, oh, don't you dare use the word decimate and not mean kill one out of every 10, even though there's a common usage that has evolved from that. And then,
Right.
don't do this.
Yeah.
And in fact, I had myself a good time because I know a certain person's going to get lit by that. And I put one in Song of the Mysteries just because I know it's
Yeah.
going to light that person off.
Right.
See,
Yeah. The actually, but
So sometimes I have fun, but purple prose, fine. I can point you to books that are a lot more flowery than mine, and
mhm.
people love them. I can point you to books that you'll go to the dictionary more often than one of my books, and that would be Gene Wolfe.
Right.
They don't bitch about that.
Right.
There are other writers out there who use more vocabulary than I do. So why are they taking issue? There's something else.
Yeah.
It's like when something makes you mad and you start digging in and you got that attitude. So I
Right.
just let it go off. If somebody's got a dislike of the English language and the precision, words are precision tools. If they want to read a book where somebody squeezed all the juice out of that
Yeah.
and doesn't use the full impact of what's available,
Right.
go on. Go read Daniel Steele. If you really don't want to be tested and tried, if you really don't want to have the full range of experience that is possible through language, if you don't want the full range of experience that's possible in life, build yourself a little shell and protect yourself. I'm not writing for those people in this series. I
Right.
want to bust your shell a few times.
Yeah.
And I'm going to build very methodically towards extreme impact moments. And if you don't have the patience for it, go read something that moves faster according to your lights. My God, we've got billions of people on the planet. There's a story out there for everybody. There's
Right.
multiple stories out there for everybody. So why am I worried if one person or 10 or 50 or 1,000 or 100,000 or a million walks away displeased? There's
Mhm.
plenty more people that this story will be just right for. So I'm writing for them.
Heck yeah. Heck yeah. I think your prose I always refer to prose plural by accident, but I think your prose is yours and Erickson's I really think are just like perfectly made for me. Absolutely adore the prose you use in Wars of Light and Shadow, the prose you use in Master of Whitestorm, and I've heard some modern authors, because I feel like the trend now is more simplistic prose, overly simplistic prose. And I've heard some authors say, well, oh, I'm just getting the story across. I don't use different language. I don't try to make my prose elevated because I'm just telling the story. And it's like, well, words are all you have. So like, why wouldn't you use them? Like, why wouldn't you use in a prose format storytelling? I just don't understand
Because some people can't handle anything they don't know. It shames them and it scares them and it makes them feel insecure. We see it all the time. I mean, you're entering a really challenging profession.
Mhm.
You're going to run up against people in your profession who have more letters after their name than you do. And you may know more about your subject than they do, and they're going to get all out of shape when you say this is wrong.
Right.
There's some people who cannot stand to be challenged. I have built my life around challenging myself and rising to meet it, stepping into something where I know nothing, and then sticking at it through thick and thin until I get good at it.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes laying my well-being on the line, offshore sailing or rappelling off a steep cliff or jumping a 6-foot fence on a horse, okay? Though that horse is bigger than me, that fence is huge. If something goes wrong, it's everything. So you better get it right. I
Side
built my
tangent.
life
You make
rising to challenges, and I wrote the Wars of Light and Shadow for people who want to rise to challenges and think. And if you do not want to be challenged, and you do not want to think, and you do not want to ever be out of your comfort zone or encounter a concept that may be beyond your depth, where you have to rise to meet it, you're not going to pick Malazan, and you're not going to pick this, and you're not going to pick certain books that push the boundaries. And I think the mistake that they make is because they think it opens like a typical epic fantasy set in Europe in medieval times. They think that they're in that, and when it breaks that shell, because it never was set up to be that, it was set up to leave that bubble in place so I could deal with other things first before I popped that bubble and said, no, you're not in Kansas anymore.
Right.
You are not in Kansas anymore. So it's expectations once again. If the reader gets angry because their expectation has been shattered and they get in a sour point of view where now we're just going to pick it apart because it didn't do what I wanted, this is not the book for you, because I want to blow the foundations a few times. I want to blow the envelope. Not once, but many times. And so good. If this story throws you out in the beginning because you're hanging on too tightly, this book is not written for you to be in control. Book is written in a style that will take control of you. It will take your frame of mind. It will take your emotional state. You know, people say, I want to write a transparent character so that my reader can be them and bring all of their flawed viewpoint to the table and not be challenged, so that the reader can step in and this is their story. The protagonist of the story never rattles their cage.
Right.
You've heard that described.
Like you're talking about the audience stand-in type of...
The book where the main character can be anybody. Don't describe them too much. Don't give me... This book is not going to allow that. You know, you've read 3 books now. It will not permit you to stand in these characters' shoes and be anybody else but that character.
Right.
You're not allowed to feel anything else but what that character feels, because it's so strongly worded on the page. That is who you have to be. Some readers hate that. What if you're a person that's scared of emotions? This book is going to terrify you, because the characters in this book are not afraid to feel what they feel.
Right.
So not only is it going to deliver the heightened moment of action, it's going to deliver the emotional impact with a freaking hammer. And if you can't let go of control of how you want to feel right now, you're going to 1-star this book or get angry at it and then have a sour attitude coming into the next and the next and the next, saying, oh, I just read it. It was a trial to get through. Well, why bother? It was a person who couldn't let go, who was afraid of losing control, who was afraid to live outside of themselves and really empathize to the degree this book forces you to. So I had, an editor who said, you oversteer everything. You put the line of dialogue and you don't let the reader feel that. You put the character's response to that dialogue. Well, yes, because I'm delivering that character's experience.
Right.
I am not allowing the latitude for you to drift over here, because if I did, you wouldn't land where I needed you to land in book 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, and 11. So there are lots of ways that readers could come in with the wrong expectation and get slammed in the teeth by this book, this series of books, because they were not designed to allow that. Can't just put on Arathon's character and pretend it's your skin over.
No, it feels like the exact antithesis to that. Like, we have characters like Harry Potter, Luke Skywalker. The whole point is anyone could be Harry Potter, Luke Skywalker. And one thing I heard about this series before starting it, that I wasn't sure how that was going to work, and having read it, I think it was the perfect choice, was the distance of perspective from the main character of Arathon. Or I mean, there's a lot of characters in the series, but I would say Arathon, at least in my subjective viewpoint currently, I'd say is the main character. And having the perspective peeled back and seeing how a lot of other characters perceive Arathon was such a brilliant move on your part, on how to like empathize with that character. And Arathon's characterization is presented in a way that is so different from 99% of other books out there. And it just really made the series stand out for me. And
it is absolutely written the way it was supposed to be written. for a major reason. And a lot of readers coming into this going, yeah, 20-year-old protagonist, I know what to expect. Immature, this, that. Arathon steps through that gate as an initiate master. He has gone through a rigorous training that involved all of his childhood.
His maternal
and
grandfather.
You do not see what happens in his head because Arathon says great power walks very softly. You have to ask. Not only that, it doesn't necessarily reveal itself. So you are seeing the interpretation of him from the outside. And the only ones who really understand him are other who are walking on that level or beyond. You will eventually see what molded this person to be who he was. And when you go back after seeing what molded this character and go back to page 1 and understand what you're reading, it's going to read like a whole different story. So yes, he's going to be seen through the fractured viewpoint of everyone around him, because line right out of Curse of the Mistwraith, the only unsplintered view is found from within. It's said right on the page.
Right.
It said right on the page how much power sometimes walks in these characters' shoes. Go back to Curse of the Mistwraith and look at the moment Arathon meets the eyes of Asandir. That moment where those two characters meet and Arathon perceives what he's looking at, drops him to his knees. He loses it. And he says, it says right on the page, he's staring at the blinding power of the infinite. Right on the freaking page in Curse of the Mistwraith. How many readers walked right past that?
Right.
Oh, if you miss it the first time, you'll miss it. Miss it the second time, you'll miss it. When you're ready to get it in the face, you'll have a 2x4 between the eyes. So that's why I said, even though I told it straight out, sometimes readers go, oh yeah, it's just this, and their own assumptions blind them. Even though this hugely controlled character is knocked to his knees. I mean, that is so out of character for everything you've seen all the way along. It's like that moment, it was earthquake.
Right.
There's so many moments like that. They're right on the page.
This proclivity to like gloss over those things and operate with your own assumptions. I will just say I am not.
No, I don't expect that.
It happens to me too. Like I think it'll happen to a lot of readers, but I think it also contributes to a kind of evergreen quality to the series, because a lot of these things that don't hit us when you come back to these scenes after, I know that this will be one I reread.
Well, the other thing is, you know that as the story goes on, when that power is revealed, you're gonna go, holy goodness,
how did I not see it?
No. Would you have blundered if you'd been in the room with that and assumed what was going on? What you thought was happening was so much more, so there's these shattering moments where suddenly you realize how very wrong you were. Right. So even the dialogue, even what you would have said to this, even what the characters say to a character like that, when it becomes revealed what's really happening. Right. So it's like, it's not all over the page like you get at the Battle of Pale. We have floating cities and, all that power is revealed right in your face from the very beginning. And then you piece together exactly what you're seeing. This one, power on that scale walks so softly, it can be right on the page and you'll miss it.
Right.
And you're supposed to.
Yeah.
How many times might you have walked past a true adept in your lifetime and missed it? Because those people walk very, very softly. Right. The guy with all the power is not the one yapping around the campfire. He's the one that's sitting under the bush being totally quiet.
Right.
Real life can be really different. So, this is the kind of juxtapositions. And so this is why the Empire readers, this is not designed for them. Right. Because of exactly things like that. Pretty much with the Empire, where you're told it on the page and you can pretty well rely on that opinion. It doesn't change. What you see is what you get. In this case, what you see is what you missed. Right. Yeah. It will reveal itself.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, but you haven't gotten there yet because Curse of the Mistwraith sets the stage. Ship's Warhost invests you in the character, all the characters. It invests you in the world just enough to realize that there's more here than you think. The middle arc raises it to worldview.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to understand the world. You're going to understand the factions. You're going to understand their moral high ground mostly. And you're going to begin to realize how much you didn't see in the first book. So you're going to see worldview just in that third arc. And that's setting the stage for the fourth arc, which is staging for the full bore Song of the Mysteries. So you're staging for the mysteries in arc 4. You're seeing the underpinnings. So it's beyond worldview, way beyond.
Mm-hmm.
And then Song brings it all together.
Okay.
In one big thunderclap of a book.
And you said there's a pretty big shift. Well, not a shift, but a subversion of what readers might expect halfway through the Alliance of Light, the third arc.
The teetering point, the tipping point book is Peril's Gate.
Okay.
And that is going to change the ground on which you are standing. Yes. And that is also the tipping point for the series.
Okay.
So even though quite a lot of what you're seeing has been straight up on the page, this is going to reveal a lot of what you've been standing on, and it is not the foundation that you thought.
Okay.
And then it's going to build on that foundation from there. And this is what I call the right turn in the series. You know, in the right turn, everybody assumes, oh, Curse of the Mistwraith is about this. And then they hit that middle point. And they go, wait a minute. We thought this was the finale of the book. It would happen in the middle. Because that's not the finale of the book. That's part of the underpinnings. That's part of the furniture of this book. It's part of the driving force of this book. But it is not the finale.
Right.
Peril's Gate is the centerpin of the series, and it is going to shift the ground upon which the series is building, and it's definitely going to take it in a different direction than many readers will expect. And I don't want to say too much because you're not nearly there yet.
Right.
So that's
like
why
3
that's
books
a make or
left,
break book. Either that book locks the people in and they go, oh my God, this is the most incredible, or this series is not going to do what I expected it to because it's not going to follow the contour of your standard epic in the way that they think it is. I was set out to do something very different. I kept the trappings.
Right.
And I built through layers of experience, but when it starts to step off the deep end into things that are beyond, it's not going to tread the accepted course that most people choose in their lifetimes. It's going to break the envelope a bit.
I definitely.
And either they're going to, and some may fall off the wagon then, and some may fall in love with it then. It depends on what their attitude is and what they're looking for in life. You know, everybody looks at Earth history and they think that's the only way history could have gone. There's 100 ways it could have diverged. And they look at evolution and they say, well, evolution had to go through this and had to go this. What if evolution took a different course? And I play with a bunch of what ifs. A different course was followed. And that's where the second half of the series is really going to kick in gear. And the Gallant sort of peeps a little bit through the keyhole.
Probably my favorite aspect of the Gallant. Can you hear me? Sorry,
Yeah.
I think you froze for a little bit.
It's because people are streaming movies. And you will not lose the audio. You might lose the picture because we have a slower internet speed. And when they're all streaming their movies, it chops us out for a minute. But you won't lose the connection and you won't lose the audio.
I was thinking it was me because we were getting some rain. But there have been a few times where the image froze and I'm like, are you there? But before I'd heard the audio, it just happened to cut out right as
No, it's my internet because we're hitting that time when they're streaming their movies. It's 7:30. They've had their dinner and they're turning on their whatever they do with their phones at night or their computers. They're using the internet. So we didn't pay for the highest tier. Why? We're not streaming movies. We can't afford to.
Right. Luckily, my sister is a gamer, so she's got the high-end Wi-Fi that I can just sneak onto for my video stuff. So that's pretty convenient.
But you won't lose the connection, so don't panic if things get wavery with the video. It's just what it happens this hour of the day.
Okay. Sweet,
So
sweet.
you were saying what your favorite thing was the Gallant was.
Oh, yeah, one of my favorite aspects of the Gallant was seeing the different Paravian races, and we only really see like echoes of their presence throughout the series. So
No,
that
you're going there.
oh really? Okay. Okay.
The Gallant cracks the keyhole just a little bit, and you can
Right.
see that this world's makeup is not Earth,
Right.
and you can see that oh gee, aren't they cute? They're unicorns. Oh no, they're not. I mean, they're
Right.
not what you imagine. They're a whole lot bigger than that,
Yeah, like
and a whole
unicorns and
lot bigger than
centaurs,
that.
a lot of fantasy fans or
A
fantasy readers will
whole
see
lot
it and be like, "Oh, we know
bigger.
this." And it's like
No,
it's
the
different than
Gallant
what
cracks, so you're going to understand right away that you're not in Kansas.
right.
And you're going to understand a bit more about this world before things got quite broken. But trust me, the series will eventually take you there
Right.
bigger
Do you think the Guardian will also crack it open?
in different ways.
Mhm.
Yes, in different ways. You know, I don't spend a lot of time until later in the series messing with some of the third age ruins and the first age ruins. You
Mhm.
know, as the series goes forward, you begin to get some of that history. Some of the Guardian's going to throw you into the middle of some of that stuff that's left over.
Okay.
The Fellowship of Seven handles a whole lot more things than you imagine that they do. You haven't any idea. You will as the series unfolds, but the Guardian will crack that open just a little bit wider.
Kind of my first thoughts on the Fellowship, like when we as the readers first encountered them, I actually thought they weren't human. I thought they were like godlike beings with the semblance of humanity. That was my initial thought, but now I've kind of I don't know why I had that initial assumption, but I think
Well,
my
they're 25,000 years old at this point,
yeah,
and there's a reason that they became what they became. You'll see that the series will unfold all of that. That's why I said you're OCD person that has to know right now.
Mhm.
I'm not going to give you that
Yeah,
right off the bat because the characters don't know it. I'm not
right.
going to tell you. The characters are going to discover it.
And for me as a reader, I love that um, air of ambiguity. I love piecing things together, and I think for series that kind of spell things out outright to me, there's an element of the reading experience that I lose for stories like that.
They
Um,
were great when you were 14,
right,
but
right,
now, no,
right,
because you've grown up enough to know there's more than meets the eye and you're waiting for the other shoe to drop.
right,
So, yeah, exactly. And there's some people who mentally, their brains just work that way.
right.
You know, they're neurodivergent people who their brains work differently. And so that's why I don't get hot and bothered when somebody says this book wasn't for me. So,
Well, if you have any closing thoughts, it's been a privilege talking with you, and I hope that we could do this again in the future. When I've read more of your works, I'd love to have you on the channel again, and we can talk about things, and maybe with myself having more context on a lot of your bibliography, the conversation can shift and change with that added context, and maybe we could do a more spoilery conversation on the series and on other books.
I'm always happy to have discussions with you guys because each one of you brings different questions and different interests to the table. And
Right.
there's so much went into the development of this series. There's always room to expand on what's been said before. It's not the same thing. It always takes a turn because you were on the other side of the conversation.
Right.
So of course I'm available for that because it's part of the fun of life is seeing we're made individuals for a reason.
Right.
And we can either run from that and build walls or we can be enriched by it.
Mm-hmm.
And I've always been the one to say, let's enrich like crazy.
Right. Yeah. We're not hive mind creatures. So I know I myself, I love watching, John's read along. I love watching John Minton, his read along. I love watching Philip and AP's reception of the book. And, I always, like you said, we're all individuals. So I always walk away from those videos with a new context of like the text is the same, but we are what changes. The reader is what
That's right.
varies.
That's right.
So the text is the same, but we all live different human experiences, and everybody gleans something a little bit different. And I feel like this series kind of is like an ego death series. Like so many, like if somebody thinks, oh, I understand Wars of Light and Shadow, I feel like they're going to constantly be challenged by what comes next in the text, and also how other people communicate with the text and take that in. And I absolutely love that about the series, and I love what it's doing in the community, and how many different experiences are able to draw different things from this work.
Well, it's my pleasure to see that happen because you guys bring something to it that expands what I know too.
Right.
So it's enjoyable all the way around for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the way the series was meant to be. It was not supposed to be a little walled garden.
Well, thank you so much for your time today, Janny. It has been a pleasure talking to you, and I can't wait to do this again.
Thank you for having me, and I can't wait either.
Awesome.
Enjoy the rest of your journey.
Thank you. Thank you.